His name was Marcus Reyes, and he was 44 years old the cold week he came home to bury his father. I want to tell you a little about Marcus before I tell you anything else, because for the first part of this story, Marcus is not, I will be honest with you, an easy man to like. He is going to do something very soon that may make you want to reach into the screen and shake him. And I ask you to hold off on judging him too hard, because by the end I think you'll understand him, and I think you may even forgive him. The way he eventually had to learn to forgive himself. Marcus had grown up in a small town called Drummond, tucked away in the hills of a poor rural county, the kind of county that the rest of the world drives straight through on its way to somewhere it considers more important. Hard country, beautiful, but hard. Steep green hollows and narrow roads and little scattered farms and old mill towns where the mill had closed 40 years ago and nothing had come to take its place. The sort of place where people are proud and tough and very often broke, and where, when something goes wrong with your body, the nearest hospital is an hour of bad road away, and the nearest doctor who'll see you without money up front is, well, for 40 years, the nearest doctor who'd see you without money up front was Marcus's father, Dr. Samuel Reyes, though hardly anyone in that county ever called him Dr. Reyes. To every soul across those hills he was just Doc Sam. And Doc Sam, for the whole of his working life, ran what I can only describe as a clinic on wheels, a free one, out of the back of an old converted school bus. Let me tell you about the bus, because the bus is the heart of all of this. Years and years ago, back before Marcus was even born, Doc Sam had bought a worn-out, retired school bus at a county auction for almost nothing, and he had set about turning it into something nobody had ever seen in those parts. He tore out the seats. He built in an examination table and a little fold-down desk and cabinets and a sink with a water tank and a locked cupboard for medicines and a couple of folding chairs and shelves for supplies. He wired in lights. He made it, in short, into a small but real doctor's surgery that could drive itself anywhere. And then he painted the whole thing, the entire bus, a bright, cheerful sky blue, so that you could see it coming from a mile off down a valley road. And for 40 years, Doc Sam drove that blue bus up every hollow and down every dirt track in that county, to the farms and the trailer parks and the migrant labor camps and the old folks too frail to travel, and he treated whoever needed treating, and the one thing he never, ever did, in 40 years, was send a bill. That is the truth of it. Doc Sam never charged a poor man a penny in his life. If you had money, and you insisted, he might let you leave a little something in a jar by the door, and that little something is mostly what kept the petrol in the tank and the medicine in the cupboard. But if you didn't have money, and across that county a great many people did not, then you got exactly the same care as anyone else, with a smile, and not one word ever said about what it cost. For 40 years, in a bright blue bus, the whole county loved that man. I want you to understand the size of that. There were people in those hills who were alive only because the blue bus had come bouncing up their road on the worst day of their lives. There were children all over that county that Doc Sam had brought into the world on that fold-down table, and old people he'd sat with and held the hand of at the end, and farmers he'd stitched up and mothers he'd talked through a long night, and more lives than anybody could ever count, that he had quietly, patiently saved, asking nothing, year after year after year. And his own son hated the bus. That is the hard thing I have to tell you about Marcus, and it's the engine of this whole story. So sit with it for a moment, because it isn't as simple as it sounds. Marcus didn't hate the bus because he was a bad person. Marcus hated the bus because the bus had taken his father away from him for his entire childhood. You see, every hour Doc Sam spent up some hollow tending a stranger's fever was an hour he wasn't home. Every weekend the blue bus was out on the roads was a weekend Marcus spent waiting at a window. While Doc Sam was being a hero to the whole county, his own boy was growing up feeling like he came somewhere a distant second to every sick stranger in those hills. Marcus's mother had died when he was young, and after that it was just the two of them and the bus always won. That's how it felt to a lonely boy. The whole world got Doc Sam's time and his kindness and his attention, and Marcus got the leftovers, and the leftovers were thin. So the moment Marcus was old enough, he left. He got himself trained as a paramedic, which, when you think about it, is a son trying to be like his father and trying to get away from him at the very same time. And he went off to work in a city far away, on the ambulances, and he hardly came back. Father and son drifted apart the way they do, a missed call here, a holiday skipped there, until there was a kind of polite cold distance between them that neither one of them knew how to cross. And by the time our story begins, things had gone badly for Marcus on top of all that. He'd burned out on the ambulances, the way good people in that work so often do, seen too much, carried too much, and he'd left the job. His marriage had come apart not long after. He was working odd jobs, drifting, behind on everything, and feeling, at 44, like a man whose life had quietly failed without ever making a sound. And it was into the middle of all that tiredness and disappointment, that the phone call came, telling him his father had died. Doc Sam had gone the way he'd lived, out helping somebody. He'd had a heart attack of his own, an old man's heart finally giving out on his way back from a call up in the hills. And he'd managed to pull the blue bus over to the side of the road, and that's where they found him. 81 years old, still driving that bus, still answering calls. So Marcus came home to Drummond, tired and broke and full of feelings he didn't have names for, to bury a father he'd never quite made peace with. And the funeral, I have to tell you about the funeral because it was the first crack in Marcus. He'd expected a small thing, a handful of old folks. Instead, the church couldn't hold the people. They came from every corner of that county, hundreds of them, far more than the building could take, so that they spilled out the doors and down the steps and stood in the cold in the road, people Marcus had never met, people of every kind. Old farmers and young mothers and migrant workers and children, and one after another they came up to Marcus and took his hand and told him, with tears in their eyes, what his father had done for them. Doc Sam delivered my babies. Doc Sam sat up all night with my husband. Doc Sam saved my life, 3 times. I owe that man everything. I owe that man my child. And Marcus stood there, shaking hand after hand after hand, hearing about a man he was not at all sure he had ever really known, and feeling, underneath his grief, a confusing and uncomfortable thing that he couldn't quite admit to. Because all those people had gotten the father he had wanted, and he'd never understood why he wasn't enough to get it for himself. After the funeral came the will, and here is where the trouble starts. Doc Sam, being Doc Sam, left almost nothing in the way of money. Of course he didn't. A man who never charged for 40 years of work does not die rich. There was the small old house Marcus had grown up in, paid off but worth little, out there on the edge of town. There was a modest field behind it, a few scrubby acres that ran down toward the county road, that had been in the family for generations, and that everybody, including Marcus, considered to be worth precisely nothing, just rough pasture and weeds and brush. And there was the bus, the old blue bus, now rusted and faded and tired, which Marcus had driven past on his way in and felt a familiar bitter twist at the sight of. That was the estate, a small house, a worthless field, and a rusted bus. But there was a line in the will, one strange line, set apart from all the rest, that Doc Sam had clearly meant for his son, and his son alone. The lawyer read it out, and then handed Marcus the page so he could see it in his father's own hand. And what it said was this: To my son Marcus, I leave everything I have, which I know is not much. Whatever else you do, son, please, don't let them tow the old bus. Don't let them tow the old bus. And Marcus, I'm sorry to tell you, felt that old bitterness rise right up his throat. Because of course, even now, even dead, the last thing his father had to say to him, the final message across a lifetime of distance, wasn't about Marcus at all. It was about the bus. The bus that had taken everything. With his father not yet cold in the ground, the old man was still asking Marcus to look after the blasted bus. He folded the page and put it in his pocket, and he thought, with a tiredness that went all the way down, that he had absolutely no intention of looking after that rusted heap for one single day longer than he had to. Now, into this picture, just a few days later, walked a man named Roy Calhoun. Roy Calhoun ran the biggest salvage and towing operation in that part of the county. Calhoun Salvage and Towing, a sprawl of crushed cars and chain-link and barking dogs out on the county road, not far, as it happened, from Doc Sam's field. And Roy Calhoun was the kind of man who can smell a grieving, broke, distracted air from a mile away, the way certain animals can smell a wounded thing. He came to the old house and he knocked on the door, all friendly concern, his cap in his hands, and he told Marcus how sorry he was for his loss. What a great man Doc Sam had been. And then, gently, oh, so gently, he got down to business. And the business was this. Roy Calhoun told Marcus that he had some bad news, and that he hated to bring it up at such a hard time, but that Doc Sam, in his last few years, had run into some trouble. The blue bus, Calhoun explained, had broken down badly a while back, a blown engine, and Doc Sam had had it towed to Calhoun's yard for repair and storage. And the bill for all of that, the tow, the work, and then the months and months of storage fees piling up, had never been paid. Doc Sam had owed Calhoun Salvage, he said, a good deal of money. Thousands of dollars. And under the law, Calhoun said, when a vehicle sits unpaid like that, the towing company can place a lien on it and eventually claim title and dispose of it. Which meant, Calhoun explained with a sad shake of his head, that he had every right to come and tow that bus away and scrap it for the debt. But, said Roy Calhoun, and here came the kindness, the spoonful of sugar, he didn't want to do that to Doc Sam's boy. No, sir. So he had a proposal. He would forgive the whole debt, wipe it clean. And on top of that, he'd take that rusted old eyesore of a bus off Marcus's hands and haul it away for free, no charge, do him a favor. And while he was at it, seeing as Marcus surely had no use for it, and surely needed the cash more than he needed scrubland, Calhoun would even buy that worthless little field off him, the few acres behind the house, for a fair price, cash in hand, so that Marcus could settle up and go back to his life and not have to think about Drummond ever again. And he slid a figure across the kitchen table. Now, I want you to understand exactly how that moment looked from inside Marcus Reyes, because it is so easy, from where you and I are sitting, to shout, no, don't do it. But Marcus didn't know what we know. Marcus was exhausted and grieving and broke and behind on his rent in a city 2 states away. He had no job and no marriage and no money and a head full of 40 years of resentment toward that bus. And here was a friendly local man offering to make a debt disappear, take the hated bus away for nothing, and hand him cash for a field full of weeds. To Marcus, in that kitchen, on that day, it didn't look like a swindle. It looked like a lifeline. It looked like a way out. It looked, honestly, like the first piece of good luck he'd had in years. And so Marcus Reyes very nearly signed. He picked up the pen. I am not exaggerating to you. Roy Calhoun had the papers ready, the way these men always do. And Marcus picked up the pen, and the only thing in his head was relief. The sweet relief of having it all be over. of being done with the bus and the field and the town and the whole sad weight of his father. He brought the pen down toward the line, and then he stopped. He stopped because of one thing, and one thing only. Because folded in the back pocket of his trousers, where he'd shoved it after the will was read, was a single page in his father's handwriting, and on it were 6 words: "Don't let them tow the old bus." And Marcus, with the pen an inch above the paper, found that he could not do it. Not yet. Not quite. It wasn't that he'd had a change of heart about the bus, you understand. It was something smaller and more stubborn than that. It was that signing that paper, right then, would have meant doing the exact opposite of the very last thing his father ever asked of him, doing it for money, doing it to a stranger while the ink on the will was barely dry. And some part of Marcus, some part he didn't even like very much in that moment, simply would not let his hand finish the movement. He put the pen down. He told Roy Calhoun that he needed a few days to think it over, that he wasn't ready to sign anything yet. And Calhoun, I'm told, did not like that one bit, and his friendly manner went a little thin around the edges, but he could hardly argue, so he gathered his papers and his cap and he left, with a tight smile and a reminder that the offer wouldn't sit on the table forever. That hesitation, that one small refusal to finish a signature, is the hinge the whole rest of this story swings upon. Because that night, unable to sleep, restless and ashamed, and angry at himself for being sentimental over a heap of rust, Marcus got up in the dark, and he walked out across the scrubby field behind the house, to where the old blue bus sat slowly rotting in the weeds. He told himself he was only going to clear out anything personal before he let Calhoun take it, that he wasn't going back on the sale, just being practical. But the truth, I think, the truth even he couldn't quite see, was that he wanted to say goodbye to it. Or perhaps to understand, just once before it was gone, what it was about that bus that the whole county had loved and that his own father had loved more than he'd seemed to love his son. The door of the bus wasn't even locked. It folded open with the old familiar wheeze that Marcus hadn't heard in 30 years, and the sound of it went through him like a current, all the way back to being a small boy. And he climbed the steps, and he stood inside his father's blue bus for the first time in his adult life. It was, in spite of the rust on the outside, still a doctor's surgery in there. That was the thing that caught him in the chest before he could put his guard up. The examination table, the paper on it gone yellow, but still there. The little fold-down desk with a pen still lying on it where his father had left it. The locked medicine cabinet. The sink. The folding chairs, set out as if for patients who might still arrive. And up on the curved ceiling of the bus, where Doc Sam had clearly put them to give frightened children something to look at while he worked, there were stickers. Hundreds of stickers. Stars and cartoon animals and smiling suns, layered over 40 years, so that lying back on that table any child in pain would have something cheerful to gaze up at. Marcus stood there and looked up at all those little stars stuck to the ceiling by his father's hand. For 40 years of frightened children, and something in him that had been clenched tight for a very long time began, just slightly, to come loose. He started going through things, gently now, his earlier hardness draining out of him. And it was while he was crouched down, looking under the fold-down desk, that he noticed the floor. Most of the bus floor was the original ridged metal, worn smooth in a path down the middle from 40 years of feet. But under the desk, set into the floor, was a panel. A square of metal that didn't quite match the rest, fitted neatly, with a slot cut into one edge just big enough for fingers. A hatch, built into the floor of the bus, hidden away under the desk where no patient would ever see it. And I think this is just about the perfect place for me to pause and ask you a small favor, because we are about to find out what Doc Sam Reyes hid under the floor of his bus. And I'd very much like you to find out alongside me. If this story has its hooks in you, if you want to lift that hatch as much as I do, would you take 1 second and tap the like button down below And if you've not yet subscribed to this channel, go on and do that too. It's a tiny thing on your end, and it's a very large thing on mine, and it's honestly what lets me keep finding stories like this one and sitting down to tell them. Thank you, truly. Now, let me tell you what was under the floor. Marcus worked his fingers into the slot and lifted the panel, and it came up smoothly, on a hinge, well oiled even now, a thing made carefully by a careful man. And beneath it, set down into a compartment built into the frame of the bus, were boxes. Steel document boxes, the flat grey kind, stacked neatly, perhaps a dozen of them, kept up off the floor of the compartment on wooden slats so the damp couldn't reach them. And tucked in beside the boxes, a larger strong box with a proper lock. Now, Marcus understood part of this straight away, because he had been a medic himself. A doctor driving around poor country roads alone in a bus carries two things that people will break in and steal, and that he is bound by law to protect. He carries controlled medicines, and he carries his patients' private medical records. So, of course, Doc Sam had built a hidden, secure compartment into the floor of that bus. Any sensible traveling doctor would. The medicines, Marcus would find, had long since been properly removed and accounted for, but the records were all still there, in those grey steel boxes. And Marcus lifted the first box out and set it on the examination table under the light, and opened it, and began to read. And he did not leave that bus again until the sun came up. Because what was in those boxes was 40 years of Doc Sam Reyes's true life, written down in his own hand. They were the records of the clinic, every patient, every visit. Every single one, across 4 decades, logged in ledgers and files in his father's small, neat writing. And, as Marcus read, the scale of it began to crush down on him like water. There were thousands of them, thousands upon thousands of visits. He read names he half remembered from childhood, and names he'd heard for the first time at the funeral, and names of people long dead. And against each visit, in a column his father had ruled by hand, was what had been done, and what it should have cost, and what had been charged. And down that last column, over 40 years and thousands of lines, the same 2 letters appeared again and again and again, until Marcus's eyes blurred. N.C. No charge. No charge. No charge. Page after page after page of it. A man who had done, by Marcus's rough and shaking arithmetic somewhere around 4 in the morning, well over $1 million of medical care, real care, life-saving care, and given essentially all of it away for free to the poorest people in the poorest county for 50 miles, and written down every penny of it not to collect it, but, Marcus slowly understood, simply because a good doctor keeps a record, because the record is how you take care of a person properly the next time they come to you sick and frightened up a dirt road. But it was the journals that finished him, because tucked in among the clinical records, in that strongbox, Doc Sam had kept private journals, and they were not about the patients. They were about him, about Doc Sam himself, and about Marcus. Marcus learned things that night, sitting in the bus, that he had never known in 44 years of being his father's son. He learned why Doc Sam had done it all. He read, in his father's own words, the story Doc Sam had never been able to bring himself to tell out loud, of growing up dirt poor in those very same hills, the child of a sharecropper, and of the winter when his own mother had fallen ill with something that any doctor could have treated in an afternoon, and of how there had been no doctor she could reach, and no money to pay one, if there had been, and of how a boy named Sam had watched his mother die slowly over weeks of a thing that was nothing, that any doctor with a bag could have fixed, and there had been no one. And Marcus read the line where his father wrote that he had stood at her grave as a boy and made her a promise, the only promise that had ever truly run his life, that he would become a doctor, and that he would make certain that no one in those hills ever again died for the simple crime of being poor and far away. And that everything after, the medical school he'd half-starved to get through, the bus, the 40 years, all of it, every mile of it, had been him keeping a promise to his dead mother. And then Marcus came to the parts about himself. And those were the parts that broke him fully, alone in that bus in the dark, because his father had written about him constantly. Through all 40 years, he had written about missing his boys' birthdays and hating himself for it. He had written about the look on Marcus's face at the window when the bus pulled away, and how he carried that look up every hollow with him like a stone in his chest. He had written, more than once, that he feared he was failing the one child he had in trying to be a father to a whole county, and that he didn't know how to be both, and that he prayed Marcus would one day understand, even though he, Sam, had never found the words to explain it while there was still time. And folded into the pages, kept all those years, were Marcus's childhood drawings, crayon drawings of a blue bus, of a stick-figure father. One, from when Marcus must have been 5 or 6, showed the blue bus with a little boy standing beside it, and underneath, in a child's shaky letters, it said, "My dad helps people." And his father had kept it for 40 years in a locked box under the floor of the bus, where it was safe. You understand now, I hope, what the line in the will really meant. Don't let them tow the old bus. It was not, it was never, his father choosing the bus over his son one final time. It was the exact and complete opposite. That bus was the whole truth of Doc Sam's life, the keeping of a promise to a dead mother, the saving of thousands of lives, and the only inheritance worth a damn that he had to leave. And he was begging his son not to let the world haul it away to be crushed for scrap before Marcus had the chance to climb inside it, and finally understand who his father had been, and how much, all along, underneath all that distance, he had been loved. The bus was the message. Marcus had only to open it. Marcus walked out of that bus at dawn a different man than the one who had walked in. And the very first thing the new man did, once the sun was properly up, was take out the papers Roy Calhoun had left on the kitchen table and tear them, slowly and deliberately, into very small pieces. Because here is the other thing Marcus had found in that strongbox, sitting right there on top, as if his father had known, as if his careful, far-seeing father had left it exactly where it would be needed. He found the title to the bus, the clean, clear, original title in Samuel Reyes's name, free of any lien, any claim, anything at all, and clipped to it he found a receipt. A paid receipt from Calhoun Salvage and Towing, dated 3 years earlier, marked paid in full. In Roy Calhoun's own messy hand, for the tow and the repair and the storage of one school bus, paid in full 3 years ago. The debt that Roy Calhoun had sat in that kitchen and described, the thousands of dollars Doc Sam supposedly still owed, the lien that supposedly gave Calhoun the right to take the bus. Every word of it was a lie. The bill had been paid years before. Doc Sam, careful as ever, had kept the receipt. Roy Calhoun had walked into a grieving man's home and tried to use a debt that did not exist to frighten that man into handing over a bus and a field for almost nothing. And Marcus, exhausted and broke, had very nearly let him. But why? That was the question that rang in Marcus's head all that morning. Why would a salvage man go to all that trouble of lies and forged-up debts over a rusted bus that genuinely wasn't worth scrapping, and a field of weeds that genuinely did look worthless? It made no sense, until Marcus, now thoroughly awake and thoroughly suspicious, did the thing his father would have done, and started asking careful questions around town. And what he learned was this: the field. The few scrubby acres behind his father's house, the worthless brush and weeds that everybody dismissed, including Marcus, That field happened to sit on the exact spot where the state was about to build a new interchange off the county road, with a planned commercial corridor running alongside it, a truck stop, a gas station, fast food places, the whole thing. Plans had been quietly approved. The land along that stretch was about to become worth more per acre than anything in the county had been worth in living memory. And Roy Calhoun, whose salvage yard sat right nearby, had heard about it early, the way local men with connections do, and had moved to grab up the land along the corridor before the owners caught on. Most of it he'd already gotten. Doc Sam's field was the last piece he needed, the keystone parcel, right at the mouth of the interchange, and the rusted bus sitting on it, with its fake debt, had been nothing but the crowbar Calhoun meant to use to pry the whole valuable thing loose from a son, too sad and too broke to look closely. So now Marcus understood all of it, and he was, by his own account, absolutely furious, in a clean, cold way he had not felt in years. But he did not go charging off half-cocked. He was Doc Sam's son, after all. And that night in the bus had reminded him whose blood he carried. He gathered his proof first, the way his father would have, the clean title, the paid receipt. He made copies of everything and put the originals back where they were safe. And then he went to see the one person in Drummond he knew he could trust, an old man named Walter Pruitt, who had been the town's lawyer once, long retired now, and who happened to be married to a woman named Lottie Pruitt, an old widow whom Doc Sam had driven out to see in the blue bus every single week for the last 6 years of her life, free of charge, when no one else would make the trip up her road. When Marcus laid it all out on Walter Pruitt's kitchen table, the title, the paid receipt, the story of Calhoun's visit, and the truth about the interchange, the old lawyer went quiet for a long moment, and then he took off his glasses and he said, "Marcus, your father drove 40 minutes up a mountain every Thursday for 6 years to keep my Lottie comfortable, and he never once let me pay him. So you listen to me. I will take Roy Calhoun apart for you, and I will do it for free, and it will be the finest pleasure of my old age." And he meant every word. It did not even take a courtroom in the end, and I'm rather glad of that, because what happened instead was better. Walter Pruitt sent Roy Calhoun a single letter, laying out plainly that the debt he'd claimed had been paid in full 3 years prior, with a copy of Calhoun's own receipt enclosed, that the bus was held under clean, clear title, and that Mr. Calhoun's attempt to use a fabricated debt to obtain a grieving heir's property looked to an old lawyer's eye, a great deal like attempted fraud, and that unless Mr. Calhoun wished to discuss that word with the county prosecutor, he would withdraw every claim at once and would never approach Marcus Reyes again. The claims were withdrawn the same week. But here is the part I love. Walter Pruitt, that fine old man, did not stop there. He understood the bigger picture now, the whole quiet land grab along the interchange, all those neighbors Calhoun had bought out cheap before they knew what was coming. And he made sure the story got around. And the story got around a county that, you will remember, loved Doc Sam Reyes more than it loved almost anything on earth. So when word spread that Roy Calhoun had tried to cheat Doc Sam's boy out of his daddy's bus and his daddy's land with a pack of lies, while his own Lottie and 1,000 others owed that man their very lives, the county turned on Roy Calhoun like weather coming over a ridge. People he'd swindled out of their land came forward, now that they knew. The newspaper got hold of it. The whole crooked scheme along the interchange came undone in the daylight, and Roy Calhoun, who had been so very friendly with his cap in his hands in Marcus's kitchen, found his name was mud across that entire county, and stayed mud, and the developers he'd been fronting for backed away from the whole stink of it as fast as their lawyers could carry them. And Marcus Reyes was left, when the dust settled, holding the one piece of land at the mouth of the new interchange that everybody now needed, with a clean title, no debt, and the upper hand entirely. He had gone, in the space of a few weeks, From a broken man about to sign away his father's life for pocket money, to a man holding a small fortune. The field that everyone, including his own son, had called worthless, turned out to be worth more than Doc Sam had earned in 40 years of medicine. Which is a bitter sort of joke when you think about how that good man lived and died with empty pockets, except that it isn't bitter at all, because of what Marcus did next. Because Marcus did not sell that land to the highest bidder and disappear, though he could have, and no soul on earth would have blamed him. What Marcus did, you will perhaps have already guessed if you've understood the kind of man that night in the bus had turned him into. He sold a portion of the land, the part fronting the road, to the state for the interchange, for a fair and enormous price. And every dollar of it, every single dollar, he poured into the one thing his father had cared about in all the world. He brought back the blue bus. He had it restored properly, the rust cut out and the engine rebuilt and the whole thing painted once more that bright, cheerful sky blue you could see coming a mile down a valley. He restocked the medicine cabinet and the supplies. He kept the stickers on the ceiling exactly where they were, every star and sun and cartoon animal, only adding a few new ones. And then Marcus Reyes, who had trained as a paramedic half a lifetime ago in a confused attempt to both be his father and escape him, who had burned out and walked away from the work he was born for, Marcus took the rest of that money and set up a proper foundation, a real one, to fund a free mobile clinic across that county forever. He hired doctors and nurses to staff it. He bought a second bus, and then a third, and he himself climbed back into the work, behind the wheel of the original blue bus, going up the hollows and down the dirt tracks to the farms and the camps, and the old folks too frail to travel, treating whoever needed treating, and never, not once, sending a bill. The county still calls it Doc Sam's Bus. They always will. But these days, when it comes bouncing up a hollow road, bright blue against the green, it's Doc Sam's son at the wheel, finally home. Finally doing the only work that ever truly mattered to either of them. Finally understanding the thing his father could never find the words to say while there was time. And on the dashboard, where Marcus can see it on every drive, taped up and a little faded, is a child's crayon drawing of a blue bus and a stick figure father, with 4 shaky words underneath. My dad helps people. I think about that man Doc Sam Reyes a great deal, about a poor boy who watched his mother die for want of a doctor, and who turned the worst day of his life into a promise, and then spent 40 silent years keeping it, asking nothing. In a bright blue bus, while the world drove straight past his county on its way to somewhere it thought was more important. And I think about how very nearly all of it, the whole of that good and quiet life, was hauled away to be crushed for scrap by a liar with a friendly cap. And how the only thing that stood between that man's legacy and the crusher was 6 words in a will and a son who, at the very last second, with the pen already moving, couldn't quite bring himself to finish. Don't let them tow the old bus. He didn't. Thank God in the end, he didn't. That is the story of Marcus Reyes and his father, and the blue bus that the whole world thought was junk. Thank you, from the very bottom of my heart, for staying with me all the way to the end of it. I know it asked a lot of you to sit with, and the fact that you did, that you're still here with me now, means more than I have any easy way of telling you. If this one reached you, if it stirred something up, would you let me know in the small ways that the machine can count by tapping the like button down there, and, if you haven't already, by subscribing to the channel before you go. Every subscriber, every single one of you, is a real and direct reason that I get to keep doing this, and I promise you I never take a one of you for granted. And if you find you'd like to do a little more, if you'd like to help me keep these stories coming, and keep them free of adverts cutting across the parts that ought to be quiet, then you can support the channel directly over on my Patreon. The address is patreon.com/TatumStories. Let me say that once more so you have it. Patreon.com/Tatum Stories, written all as one word, spelled Tatum. The good souls who join me over there hear every story first and with no adverts at all, and it is their support, more than anything else in this world, that buys me the hours a story like Doc Sam's truly deserves to have spent on it. If that's something you're able to do, I would be deeply honored to count you among them. And if it isn't, then please understand that you sitting here and listening right to the final word is a genuine gift all on its own, and I mean that as plainly and as gratefully as I know how to say it. Now then, if you're not quite ready to drive back down out of these hills with me just yet, YouTube should be putting another of my stories up on your screen this very moment. Go on and give it a look, get yourself good and settled, and let me tell you another one. Until then, this has been Arnold Tatum, and you have been listening to Tatum Stories. Take good care of one another out there, and look in on the ones who live up the long roads where nobody else bothers to go. And the next time some friendly fellow with his cap in his hands tells you that the old thing in the field is worthless and he'll kindly take it off your hands, do me a favor and go and have a proper look inside it first. You may find, as Marcus did, that it was the most valuable thing you ever owned. Goodbye for now.